Hello, so Ken here. Welcome to day 5. So congratulations on making it to the very last day of the chess challenge. So that is awesome. I'm really happy for you. So today we're going to wrap things up with this 5-day challenge. And so we're going to quickly talk about some chess lingo. So if you've been playing chess or you've been hearing about the game, you will be familiar with tactics and strategy. So today I'm going to review the difference between tactics and strategy and why they're important when it comes to chess. And then we'll go through two core tactics that is very common and that is going to be very relevant for you as you begin to play the game of chess. Okay. So you've spent the last 4 days and going through a couple of different techniques, learning different things. And so today, I want to, teach you a few things about strategies and tactics. So when we talk about, let me first define what tactics is. So tactics is part of the game where we look at the details of the position and then begin to figure out the specific exact moves that we need to play. On the other hand, strategy is a part of the game where we think about the position in general terms, and then we begin to develop a plan on what we want to do during the game. So let me try to differentiate it again. I think I provided some information on your notes today. So we are employing tactics when we see which pieces have been attacked and look at those pieces to see whether they're protected or not. When we look at possible good moves like forks, like checks, like pins, like all the different tactics that we can employ. When we begin to find a way to win a piece or to win material, or begin to look for ways to give checkmate, then we're beginning to employ tactics as well. When we begin to work out a series of moves by calculation, essentially saying, well, if I play this move, this is what my opponent will play, then this is what I can respond with. So a series of short moves that can lead to possible winning of material, that is also regarded as tactics. On the other hand, strategy is when we look at the position on the board, count all the pieces and determine who is winning, either based on the strength of the pieces compared to your opponent's pieces or on the strength of my position compared to my opponent's position. Well, when I determine which pieces are better placed in terms of piece position on the board, when I make a decision whether I should attack or defend, or when I begin to plan, maybe whether it's in the beginning phase of the game, the middle game, or end game, when I begin to plan on where to place my pieces and on which side of the board to castle on, right? And so that is the general overview of tactics and strategies. So those are important concepts you're going to be hearing a lot as you play the game of chess. And so it's good for you to be familiar with it. So now what I want to do is to look at two main tactics that are very common and that you will see most of the time as you play your game, particularly as you begin to play as a beginner. All these tactics, we employ them even in the advanced stages of chess. So the first one I want to look at is going to be a fork. So first we'll look at knight fork, then later we'll look at queen fork, and then we'll review pin. And I'm going to do this by looking at a couple of exercises. So let's start with this position here. And I will use this position to sort of explain what a fork is and how we can strategize using a fork. So in this position, let's assume that it is white to play. right? So in this position, it is white to play. So as you can see, right now the position is fairly even. I mean, white is down a pawn. Black has 5 pawns, white has 4, two rooks on each side, a queen, a knight, and a knight. So the position is fairly even. So it is white to play, but here there is an opportunity for white to create a fork. Not right away. So what is a fork? A fork is a move that attacks two pieces at the same time. And when we're talking about two pieces, we're talking about two major pieces, like a king and a queen, or a queen and a rook, or maybe a queen and a bishop, or a rook and a bishop, or a rook and a knight, or a knight and a bishop, right? So it is a move that attacks two pieces at the same time. It is one of the most common ways to win material in chess. And the knights are very good at creating forks because they jump around quite a bit. So if you're playing a game, be careful when you see the knights move. Always pay attention because the knights can easily create forks. So now we're going to review a knight fork. So looking at the position, we know white has a knight on d5. And if we look at this position, we see here that there is a possibility for white to create a fork on e7. So if I move my knight to e7, I can create a fork against the king and the queen. So as I mentioned before, a fork is when you attack two pieces at the same time. So in this case, if I move my knight to e7, I will be attacking the king and the queen at the same time. And whenever I'm attacking the king, is a check. So what that means is the king must make a move, or the player must eliminate the piece that is creating the check. So if I make this move right away, knight to e7, creating a fork, black has a defense. Black has a knight here that can capture my knight. So as a result of that, I cannot immediately play that move, knight to e7, because black will just capture my piece. But because I've seen the possibility of creating a fork on e7, one of the things I can do is to eliminate that defender of that square, because the knight now, the black knight is defending e7. So I can look for a way to eliminate that defender so that I can create the fork. And so when I'm looking at the knight, what piece can I use to eliminate the knight? So luckily I have a rook here. I can use my rook to eliminate that knight. So when I exchange my rook for a knight, that is not a fair exchange for me, because remember, my rook is worth 5 points. The knight is worth 3 points. But if I eliminate the rook, then I have the opportunity to create that fork and capture the queen that is worth a lot more. So in this position, white can play knight takes rook, rook takes knight. And if black recaptures, I can now create a fork here. So forking the king and the queen. And so once black moves the king, I can now capture the queen. And then once black recaptures, either with the pawn or with the H pawn or the F pawn, I'm now up in material, right? So I can create. So now that's rook for rook, but I'm now have a queen versus rook. So I'm up in material. And so in this position, because I have the material advantage, I can easily go ahead and win this game. Okay, so this is an opportunity, an example of how you create a fork. First, what we did was to eliminate the defender. And by doing that, I was able to create that knight fork on e7 after I eliminated the defender here. Okay, so that's an example of fork, right? So as I mentioned before, fork is when you attack two major pieces at the same time. In this case, if I can move my knight to this square, I can create a fork against the king and the queen. Okay, so hopefully that is clear. So let's look at another example. So let's assume that this same position, it is black to play. If it is black to play, black also has opportunity here to create forks, right? Now we see the king here, the rook. We also see the queen here. If it's black to play, black can move the knight to this square to create a fork against the rook and the queen. Black can move the knight to this square, but that only attacks the queen. So that is not a fork because there is no other piece that has been attacked. Black can also move the knight here, attacking the rook, but this is not a fork because only the rook is being attacked. But this is clearly a fork, right? Because now we are attacking two pieces. But if black plays the move like this, creating a fork, it's not so good. If it's white to play now, white can escape because white will first create a fork, forcing you to move your king. If you move your king to that square, white will capture your queen with a check, forcing you to make another move, and then white can save his queen, his or her queen. Okay. So that's why coming here immediately may not be the best way to create a fork. So black has a much better move that is stronger to create a fork. It has to be a forcing move. Forcing move means white must respond. White does not have a choice. So we see the square here is a good square to create a fork. But how can we create a fork that is forcing? One way to do that is to use our queen to capture this rook here. So at first glance, that may not look like a very good move because we are giving away our queen, which is worth 9 points, for a rook that is only worth 5 points. But the idea with this move is once the king recaptures the rook, the queen, once the king recaptures the black queen, then black has the opportunity to create a fork here against the king and the queen. And in that case, black will win material. So let's play it out to see. So black first captures the rook. White is forced to recapture back. Black plays the knight to d4, creating a fork on the king and on the queen. And once white moves away from the check, black recaptures the queen. So in this case, black is up a whole rook, right? So we have the two knights, but white only has one rook, black has two rooks. So black is up a whole rook. And in this position, black can go ahead to win the game. Okay, so those are examples of how you create a fork and how you do it using tactics. Right, if you remember the definition of tactics, when we create a series of forcing moves to win material, we are employing tactics. So let's look at another example. So in this example, it is black to move and win material. Again, the idea is to exploit a fork, right? In this case, a knight fork. So it's black to move. So let me give you a few seconds to think about it. What do you think black should do here to create a fork through a series of moves? Well, if we look at the position here, we'll see that black is threatening a checkmate on this square, but that checkmate is currently being defended by the queen. So black has a double attack on G2. White has a defender, the queen, and the king also defending that square G2. So there may be possibility of tactics for white to try to create a decor where the queen leaves this position or this second rank so that white can deliver a checkmate. So in this position, there are a few things that white can do. And the best move in this position is to take the rook to capture the bishop. Because if we capture the bishop, white has the option of capturing with the queen or with the rook. If white captures with the queen, then black has a checkmate on that square, because now the defender of G2 is gone to C1. If white captures with rook, then there is a good fork that we can create when the knight takes on F3. So let's play it out so that you can see. So the best move is rook takes the bishop. We know if the queen takes, we know that black has a checkmate on that square, because now that defender is gone. If the rook takes, then black can create a fork by capturing this pawn. Because once black captures that pawn, there is a fork on the queen and on the king. So let's play it out. Black captures the pawn. So now black creates a fork on the king, on the queen, and on the king. Now you may think that white can recapture the knight with a pawn. But we'll see that is not possible because this pawn is pinned by this queen. If you capture the knight, you expose your king to an attack, and that is an illegal move in chess, so you cannot recapture the knight. Okay, so this is a good fork here because now white is forced to move, and once white moves, black can capture the queen, and black is now up a whole queen. So in this position, black will just go ahead to win the game. So let's look at one more example of knight fork. In this position, it is white to move and win material. So how can we create a fork in this position? So let's look at all the possibilities white has to create a fork. If you look at the position here, you see there is a possibility for white to create a fork on this square. If the knight can go to c7, there's going to be a fork against the king and the rook. But this square is defended by the knight. So the black player has a defender. So now as a white player, what you want to do is to see, okay, how can I eliminate the defender? So luckily we have a bishop here that we can use to eliminate that defender. And if black recaptures our bishop, either with the pawn or with the queen, then we can create the knight fork. So in this case, if white captures the knight, if black recaptures with the queen, then we have a triple fork here because now we've created a fork against the king, the rook, and the queen. And if white recaptures with the pawn, then we'll simply have a fork against the king and the rook. And once the king moves, we'll capture the rook. And again, this is a winning position for the player with the white pieces. Okay, so let's move to a queen fork. So we've looked at knight forks. You can create a fork using a knight, but you can also create a fork using a queen. Remember, the queen is the most powerful piece on the chessboard. And because the queen can move in different directions on the chessboard, it is one of the best pieces to use to create forks on the chessboard. So if we look at this position, it is black to play. So let's assume it's black to play. Black can create a fork. Again, remember the definition of a fork is it is when you attack two pieces at the same time with the idea of winning material. So here black has a move that will create a fork that will attack two pieces at the same time. It will force white to make a move, and then black can go ahead and capture a piece. It's a move with the queen because we are talking about queen forks. So let me give you a minute to see if you can find the move. So if you found the move queen to b6, you're very correct in the correct response because the queen on this square is now attacking the king and also attacking the bishop. So black has created a queen fork that is attacking the king and the bishop at the same time. And so once the king moves, black will go ahead and capture the bishop, and black will be up a piece. Okay, so that is a good example of a fork where black wins material. So what if it was white to move in this position? So if it was white to move, white also has a combination that would allow him to create a fork. It's not in a move right away, just in two moves. White can create a combination to create a fork. So this is a little bit harder to see, but we see here there is a rook that is undefended. So the idea then is to see how we can create a double attack that can attack that rook. So the idea here is to eliminate this knight with the rook so that once this pawn captures back, this file will be open. And so the queen can go to that file, create a check against the king and against the rook. So let's play this out. So white can capture the knight. So if black recaptures the rook back, then white has this move here, creating a check on the king and also attacking the rook. So this is a classic fork where white is attacking two pieces at the same time. And as soon as the king moves, white can now capture that piece. And in this case, white is up material because now this is a check. Black has to move away, and then white can now move to defend his bishop. So let's look at another example. So in this example, it is white to move and win material, again, using the idea of a queen fork. So here is white to move and win material. Let me just check the position again, make sure I have it correctly. I think it is correct. White to move and win material. Okay. So this again is another opportunity for white to create a fork and win material. So it's not immediately, but at least you can see it in a series of 2 to 3 moves. So we see a rook here that is undefended. We see that the king is right in the middle of the board. And we know that this queen can have a view of that king once we move the bishop and the pawns away. We also see this knight that is defending this pawn. So once we see all these things in the position, we'll begin to think, okay, how can we attack to get hold of this rook that is undefended? So in this position, the series of moves will be white capturing the knight first. If you capture this knight, black is first. You're capturing it with a check. You're checking the king. Black can recapture with the queen or with the pawn. And it really doesn't matter what he recaptures with. So let's say he recaptures with the queen. Now we have the opportunity to create a fork. So the queen can capture the pawn, attacking the king and the rook. Right, and this is the fork. And once black defends, either by blocking with the bishop or the queen, then white can capture the rook. And if white just moves the king, again, white will just capture the rook and white is up a whole piece. Okay, so let's look at one more example of a queen fork. In this position, it is black to move and win material, again with the idea of a queen fork. So if you're the player with the black pieces, again, you begin to look at the board. You see that the king is in the center of the board. You see that the king is in the center of the board. You also see here that this rook is undefended right now. So a good move here for white to create a fork, for black, the player with the black pieces to create a fork, is to capture this knight. So that if white recaptures, the queen can now capture the pawn, creating a fork. And once the king moves, can now capture that rook. So you see how knight forks and queen forks can be very, very powerful in chess. And so when you're playing your games, you should be looking out for opportunities to create forks using your knight and your queen. So the final thing I want to review is the pin. Pin is another tactics that you can use to win material. A lot of combinations in chess are based on pins. So what is a pin? A piece is pinned when it is attacked and it cannot move because another valuable piece is behind it. It's like a pin that is sticking a piece of paper to the wall, right? That's what a pin is. And I'm going to show you with this example that we are looking at right now. So in this example, let's assume it is white to play. How can white create a pin here? So one of the ways to begin to identify a pin is to start looking at sometimes diagonals, start looking at phi's, start looking at the position of the board to see how you can create opportunities. So if we look at this diagonal here, we see that the queen and the king are on that diagonal. So that white diagonal that runs from A2 to G8, we see there's a white diagonal there, and we can use our white. There may be an opportunity for us to use our white bishop to pin the queen against the king. So once we identify that, we can begin to create a pin. So of course, one way to create a pin here would be simply just capturing the rook, the queen. And once the rook recaptures back, again, we see that diagonal here. We can play our bishop here, creating the pin. Now this rook cannot move because if the rook moves, there's going to be an attack to the king. The king will be exposed. So black has no choice but to defend. And once they defend, we can capture the rook. But we can't even capture it now because it's not a good move. If we capture it, then we'll lose a piece. We don't lose a piece, so we can capture, black can recapture, and now we are up the exchange because we have a rook against the bishop, right? So that is one idea of a pin right there. But there's even a better move for white to play in this position. So white can win a lot more material with a better move, not just queen captures queen. So if white immediately plays bishop to c4, this wins right away because the queen cannot take my queen because of the pin against the black king. And if the queen takes the bishop, then I have a checkmate on that square because the king has no way to run, nowhere to go to. So this is a terrible position now because black must lose the queen. Because if the queen takes, then that is checkmate. And if the queen does not take, let's say he tries to block with the bishop, I can just capture the bishop. And again, if the queen takes, then there is a checkmate on that square. So that is a very good pin in this position. But let's see, what if it was black to move? If it was black to move, black also has a very fantastic idea to win material with a pin. Again, if you look at that bishop that is eyeing that diagonal, we see there's a rook here, there's a king here. So there's a possibility for black to have some combination here to win material. And this is a great one. If black just plays the rook to h1. Here, white has no option but to capture. And once white capture, black can now exploit a pin to create a checkmate. So that's a queen to h3, creating a check. You think the pawn can capture, but the pawn cannot capture because of the bishop that has a pin on the king. So in this position, the only move white has is to move away, and then black can create a checkmate on that square. So this is how pins can be very powerful when you begin to see ideas, how you can use pins to win material and to win the game. So let's look at a few more examples here. In this position, it is white to move and win material, again, exploiting the idea of a pin. So here again, if we look carefully, we see that diagonal. We see the king is there. There's a black bishop and there's a white bishop here. And we have our rook here also putting pressure on that bishop. So there may be ideas here to create a fork and win material. And here a good strategy would be to take the bishop with the rook. At first glance, it seems that we are losing material because the rook is worth 5 points and the bishop is worth 3 points. But the idea is to create a pin. So here, black can only capture with the rook. Black cannot capture with the knight, with the king, because of the bishop that is protecting the rook. So if black captures with the rook, then here we have the pin once we play that pawn, attacking the rook. So this pawn now attacks the rook. The rook cannot move because we have the bishop here eyeing the king. Takes the pawn, white simply takes back and keeps the attack on the rook. And there's nothing black can do here. So if black moves away from the pin, white will simply recapture. And in this position, white will just go ahead to win because white is up a whole piece. So let's look at one more example here. In this position, it is black to move and to create a checkmate in 3 moves. Again, exploiting the idea of a pin. So again, if you're the player with the black pieces, you see you have the rook and the queen all putting pressure on that d5. You see the white king here in the center of the board. We also have this rook here putting pressure on the e5. So once we begin to see patterns like this, then it's not going to be that hard to begin to see how we can exploit the position to create a winning position. So here, the best move for black here is to first create a check here. Now, the bishop cannot recapture back because this bishop is pinned by this rook. White cannot recapture because this rook is protecting the queen. So here, white is forced to move to f1. And once white moves to f1, you see another check here. And if white tries to block with the bishop, then white has another checkmate here, again exploiting another pin. Now the bishop cannot take the queen because of that pin against the king. And if white decides not to block, if you simply move away, and black just has a checkmate on that square. Okay, so hopefully you now understand how to employ these tactics of using the fork and the pin. So what I want to do next now is to quickly go through a game I just played, so that I can walk you through how I put together all the ideas I've taught you over the last 5 days in a game, so that you begin to see all the different pieces of the ideas you've been learning and how you can use them in a game. So this is an example of how I've employed them in this game. So this game started with white playing the pawn on C. I played it to C4. Again, is one of those moves, as you learned in the game during this 5-day challenge. It's always better for you to start with the pawns in the middle, in front of your king and queen. But if you are an advanced player, you can start with other moves as well. So I responded by playing my pawn on F to F5. Right, so just taking control over that square as white is taking control over the square. So we're both taking control over one square in the middle of the board. So white continues with 2 pawns. So now white is taking control of a couple of squares here in the middle of the board. I continued by developing my knight, so putting pressure on that square. So you see some of the ideas, again, developing the knight towards the middle of the game, middle of the board. So white pushes a pawn to get more control in the center. I simply move my pawn so that I can create room for my bishop to come out and my queen as well. So white develops a knight. I develop my bishop. Then white plays a pawn with the idea of supporting this pawn move to E4. So I castled again to protect my king and bring my rook into the game. So white made that move as I was expecting the player to do. I made my move so that I can bring my bishop. White develops a bishop. I advance my pawn. White develops the knight. I advance my pawn again to create some breathing space in my position. White castles. I develop my other knight. So you can see we are all slowly developing all our pieces. White plays a pawn. I think his idea is to continue to advance on the queen side with the pawn moves. I moved my pawn to A4 because I wanted to stop his idea of moving that pawn to B4. So he plays his rook to support his idea. He wants to continue with that idea. I played my knight, again, developing my knight, putting pressure on the bishop. He sees it and he moves his bishop backwards so that I don't capture the bishop. I move my queen because now my idea is to bring my queen to the king side so that I can create some attack and put pressure on the king side position. So he plays attacking my knight. I capture, he captures, my knight is still under attack. I retreated my knight, so moving my knight backwards. He moves his king, again looking for a way to protect the king. I now move my queen with the hope of creating an attack against the king. He develops his bishop, and I move my knight. So if you're not a good player, this can be a risky move because you're exposing your king. But because I know what I'm doing, I have all my pieces and I'm moving them slowly to the king side, I think I can protect my king. So that's why I just want to create an attack against the king. So the white player realizes that and now immediately attacks to block. So in this position, I went ahead and sacrificed my knight. So some of you may be wondering, the knight is worth 3 points. Why will I give my knight away for a pawn that is worth 1 point? But the idea was to open up the king side so that I can create an attack. So here recaptured and I recaptured the pawn. So I now have 2 pawns for the knight. But the good thing is that I've opened the position a little bit and I can create an attack against the king. So he played the knight there trying to defend. Now he wants to exchange the 2 queens. Because I need my king to continue with the attack, I moved away so that I don't exchange queens. He attacked my queen. I moved away. Brings his rook to continue to defend, and I slowly started bringing my other pieces closer to the king. Because for you to create a checkmate, you need your pieces in the enemy territory. So he continues to defend. I moved my pawn because now I'm trying to create an attack to move as many pieces closer to the enemy king. He plays his rook, his queen. I continue to slowly put pressure on the king side. I move my rook. Now you can see the ideas of pins now. So now this pawn is pinned. The pawn can now move because my queen will attack. So he advanced the pawn further. I moved my queen away. Played his knight. Again, now exploiting the idea of a pin. He put his knight directly in front of my pawn. So I can capture that knight with that pawn. But right now I can because the rook will capture my queen. So you see the idea of a pin here as well. So I move my knight forward with the idea of creating a check and attacking. So he moved his knight forward as well, trying to create an attack. I captured the knight. He captured my own pawn. I went ahead, recaptured the bishop, recaptured my bishop, and I moved my queen away from the possible pin. So I went ahead and captured my queen. But this position now is bad because now I have a winning combination. So I created a check. So notice that his pawn is attacking my queen. But by moving my knight, I created what is called a discovered attack. So my knight created, and I have a double attack on the king. So my queen is attacking the king. My knight is also attacking the king. So I have a double attack on that queen, on that king. So if the king moves, then I can go ahead and create a checkmate. So now if white captures my queen with a pawn, he can't because the king is under check. So the white player has to move. So because this is a double attack, white has no choice but to move the king. So he moved the king to G2, and I continued with my attack. So I moved my queen to H1, creating a check. And the king again moved. That's the only square the king can move to. And then the next move was a checkmate. The queen to F1. Again, that queen is supported by this knight that is protecting the queen. And now the king has no square to move to. The queen cannot go to that square because of my king. My queen cannot go to that square, cannot go to that square because of my queen, cannot go there because of the pawn. Right, so this is a checkmate position. All right, so again, hopefully this is helpful. So congratulations on finishing the 5-day challenge. I encourage you to continue to practice. Just play, keep playing chess games online. And before you know it, you will improve your game. All right, again, thank you for participating. Check the notes. If you want to join us or continue to improve your chess, consider joining our level 1 group chess lessons. Okay, bye.